Caroline, Caroline, t'arrêtes pas comme
There was a
ça
warm
en
breeze that
chemin.
Friday in September when I packed my 2 large bags, kissed my family and friends goodbye, and left my home. Thus, the greatest adventure of my life was begun. On my first day of studying in France, I woke up early and took a quasi-shower, which consisted of sprinkling myself with water for hours until all the soap finally drained out of my hair. My dressing procedures were followed by the silent breakfast that had consisted of some bitter-tasting dark liquid and a hard bread-like substance. The bread I ate dry, for fear of the dark, scary-looking pot of jam. I packed my books and headed off for class. As soon as I left my street, a man on a bike stared at me as he passed. "Stupid American," he thought, and went about his business. Walking on, I passed a bakery with numerous strange people inside getting their baguettes. They stared at me as I passed. Then they all turned to one another and made various snide remarks about me. They chuckled, thinking I didn't understand anything that they were saying. When I got to the first stoplight, I waited for the little man to turn green. The drivers who had a red light chuckled and thought to themselves, "That girl has no idea what she's doing. Don't they have street signs in America?" Walking along the street, there was a man walking his dog. I smiled at him, and he scowled and thought, "Silly American, always smiling at everything." Next, I passed a school. There a number of mothers were chatting outside, having just dropped off their children. They looked at me, then back at each other. One said, "Oh my, I wouldn't wear that unless I was an American." Eventually, I passed a car repair garage. The men inside looked up as I passed. Then they looked back down at what they were doing and thought, "I should have hassled the dumb American." Just after I passed the garage, I came to another stoplight. I waited patiently again for the green man. Several students passed me, and they all said, "Does she not know how to cross the street? Maybe she needs someone to hold her hand." When I got through the stone walls that surround my city, there was a small bar where men sat outside drinking hard liquor at 8 a.m. in the morning. They all stared at me as I passed and thought seriously about surrounding me and harassing me until I screamed for help. I walked carefully down the narrow sidewalk of the street until I passed a man walking the opposite way. He tried to run me off the sidewalk and scowled at me just for being in his way. He thought, "I wish these Americans would learn how to walk." Not long after that, there was a strange and straggly-looking man in my path. He tried to stop me by asking me a question, but I kept walking. I didn't understand the question because he said it in French. But I'm pretty sure he was just trying to torture and embarrass me. When I passed the cafe just outside of my school, there were a number of beautiful people drinking their morning coffee. They all stared at me in disgust as I passed, thinking, "If we don't get these ugly Americans out of our country soon." Finally, I arrived at the little school where I would be taking classes. I pried open the enormous wooden door and ran inside before I could be attacked by anyone else. The last day I was in France, I got up early. I took a quick shower, which I found awakening and refreshing. I then dressed and enjoyed a lovely conversation with my host mother, Madame Pujola, about what she was planning to make for lunch. While we were chatting, I munched on the delicious treat she called gaufres. But I'm sure they must be more than just waffles, as their tastiness far surpassed any American Eggo. Of course, my morning gaufres would not have been the same without a spoonful of proper homemade jam. I never knew apricots could be so tasty. And no proper breakfast is complete without a bowl full of espresso with a touch of milk. I can remember one day Madame Pujola forgot to make the coffee, and I think the effect on the household was equivalent to the disasters of war. Following breakfast, I decided to take one last stroll through the city before returning to the States. Before I left, I lingered in the kitchen, watching Madame Pujola proudly cook her meal and chatting with Monsieur Pujola about whatever was on TV. Eventually, I left the house, walking leisurely down the narrow street onto the main road. Rounding the corner, I noticed that there was no bikers that morning, but there was a little old woman and her terribly ratty dog out for their morning walk. I remember them in particular from the time I thought I was lost, and it was almost dark. The little old lady showed me how to get home. I passed the bakery by my house, and the windows were totally fogged from the warm bread, contrasting the biting cold. I could barely see a small group waiting inside for their bread. I thought of what they were all planning to eat with that bread. Perhaps a stew of white beans and lamb, or a mushroom omelet. Regardless, I had no doubt it would be delicious. I walked on, past the spot where they held the fruit and vegetable market every Tuesday morning. I spotted the few bits of fruit peels left behind, and I thought of all the tasty produce Madame Poujala had purchased there. Walking along the streets near the school, I heard a child counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and I realized they were playing hide and seek again. In the neighborhood, I noticed how blue the sky is, an amazing cloudless blue. I walked past all the little houses with their shutters just opening for the day. I didn't see the little man who sat on a stoop in the evenings and saluted me as I passed. But I thought of him, and I hoped he was starting the day well. Eventually, I got close to the wall and worked my way through the traffic lights, which I had learned to predict. I passed the garbage sweepers, who hollered like normal, and I realized I wasn't looking as badly as I may have thought. On the other side of the beautiful medieval wall, I passed a little bar called the Bar of Our Friends. It was converted to an indoor bar once winter hit, but there was still a small group of men inside, enjoying the first coffee of the day. Walking down the narrow streets of the city, I couldn't help but look up to the lovely southern French architecture and the tall steeples of the churches as they contrasted the sparkling blue sky. In the plaza outside of my school, I passed the little meat shop with automatic doors. Yeah, when I passed the doors open, letting out the comforting aroma of roasted chicken. The cafe was closed for the winter. All the chairs and tables were stacked neatly, awaiting the triumphant spring return. I stopped into the little bakery known as the 6 franc Bakery, because it sold sandwiches for 6 francs. I remembered when I first made a purchase there how terribly mean I thought the owner was. But when I purchased my bread on this particular morning, she gave me a small gift of homemade nougat and 3 kisses on my cheeks to wish me farewell. I nearly broke into tears as I left. I continued my stroll through the streets of Avignon, remembering all that I had done and all that I had become in my few short months there. I remembered how I had learned to order for myself, how to ask for directions, how to take a cab, how to cross a street, and how to deal with French culture. By the time the church bells tolled noon, I was lost in my thoughts. But I knew it was time to return home. I stood still to listen. 4 initial monotone rings, followed by a rendition of Ave Maria, signaling the time for a long French lunch hour. I stood still, listening to the bells, and I knew they were singing, especially for me. Ave, 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 Maria. Perhaps the bells weren't singing just for me. And then again, perhaps the man on the bike and the people in the bakery and the people at the stoplights and the men at the bar so many months before weren't thinking especially of me either. Perhaps the bells and the people and the life that was going on around me had absolutely nothing to do with me, and at the same time, everything to do with me. I spent a semester building a life in France. I spent it letting go of what I thought and embracing what I never imagined could be true. I learned a great deal about who I am and what I can accomplish. But I think the most important thing I learned is the magnitude of perception. I think I brought home with me the understanding that the world is a sequence of varying perspectives than one defined order. Like the man on the bike and all the people on the street and the church bells and myself, life is shaped far less by reality than by our perception of it. I scurried home at the sound of the church bells, back through the streets of my little town. The air was crisp and cold on that Friday in December when I packed my bags, a little bulkier than before. Kissed my family and friends goodbye, and left my home.
Oh, Caroline, you've been through hell and come out strong. Caroline.
Bye, everybody. Bye. Au revoir. Au revoir.
All right, we're rolling. Anytime.
Straggly looking man in my path. He tried to stop me. Turn the camera off! Will you turn the camera off? I don't have pants on!